Welcome to Straight from the Source, and our guest today is Assemblyman James Gallagher. Welcome, thank you for being here.
Good to be with you again, Hayley.
You are, yes, a repeat guest, one of the very few, and the reason we're here today really is because we're getting closer to that June primary, and not so long ago, in fact, you joined us here live and made the announcement that you were going to be running at least to fill the term right after Congressman Lamalfa died, and now you're looking long-term as well.
Yeah.
I know at the time it was a very tough decision for you to make and to announce. How are you feeling about it now?
Yeah, it really was. I mean, you remember that night. I mean, went through a lot in the aftermath of losing Doug, but really feeling the call to step up and continue, really his legacy of representation. And ever since that day when we announced her run, I've been traveling all across the district. We did make the decision also to run in the new seat. Yeah. Even though it was gerrymandered, rigged, to support the Democratic political agenda. I still feel like all the things I'm hearing from constituents and people across the district is they want a real representative, someone who will fight for the cost of living, which has gotten way too high here in California. Who will fight for rural health care and has a record of doing so. Of someone who wants to go after the waste, fraud, and abuse. Yeah. That has really come to light, especially in the last month or two. We need to get to the bottom of that because that's vital tax dollars that we really need. Okay, two really good topics here: cost of living and then waste, fraud, and abuse. So first, cost of living. I read something this morning that there was this new survey saying that if you live in California and you make six figures, $100,000 a year, you're considered low middle class. Mind-blowing, right? Yeah. I know it's hard to believe, but then you think about it. You drive by the gas stations, you see $6 a gallon today, I think. In your time in the Assembly, what have you done? What are you most proud of in terms of cutting the cost of living or making California more affordable for us? Yeah, one area is in housing. I worked across the aisle to pass reforms to the California Environmental Quality Act to allow us to build more housing in this state. That was something that when I first came in, you couldn't even get a bill out of committee on that, and we ended up getting it done. I have a bill this year to slash PG&E rates by 30%. We can do it. We've actually already seen studies that show us how we can do it with programs that are not cost effective, that could be eliminated, mandates, that drive up the cost of electricity. So those are things that I just want to keep working on and get results on, for our community. On gas prices, a lot of people bring up the war in Iran. That certainly had an effect on gas prices, but just on Monday, we saw the numbers. On the East Coast, a gallon of gas is $3.95 a gallon. Yeah. But here in California, the average is $5.75. That's policy. That's because our state policies add all the taxes, the regulations, the fees, add almost $2 a gallon in additional costs. We should break through that. And I think at the federal level, we can do that. We can maybe implement reforms. Maybe we do need to federalize some of this to give people the savings they need. This is also a national security issue because we have a lot of bases out here on the West Coast. Jet fuel supply, for instance, is vital to our national security. I think there's a nexus there for us to come in and actually do something that slashes those gas and diesel prices that are, they're insurmountable. They're crushing us. Yeah,
it's pretty wild right now, the way things are in terms of cost of living. As a lawmaker, you can only do so much, right? Because you need everybody in the Assembly or a certain percentage of people in the Assembly to agree with your idea, right, in order to actually get it across the finish line. The concept of you've been a Republican in a more blue-leaning state for your career in the Assembly, right? There's always been a Democratic majority.
I've always been in the minority.
Yeah. So, we'll see. There has been so much redistricting going on across the nation, but right now the House has a GOP majority. So what do you envision that being like, being in the majority? Well,
this is also part of my pitch to the voters is I've always been in the minority, but I've passed over 60 bills through the legislative process in my career and got them signed by the governor. I've worked in a bipartisan way, to get things done for my constituents, to increase the funding. Actually, we quadrupled the funding in 2021 for wildfire fuel reduction projects. I've been a champion of those things, and I think I can continue to do that. I've worked across the aisle, for instance, we talked about this, to ban ultra-processed food in our schools' our kids' lunch program. You know, there's a lot of things that we can agree on.
Yeah, these shouldn't be party issues, right?
They shouldn't.
Yeah.
They're just good government issues and good for people issues, right? And so my pitch is, hey, this is what I've done in the minority. Imagine what I'll do when I'm in the majority.
Yeah.
You know, and it doesn't matter, you know, whatever the House composition is, I'm going to work to make sure that we get things done for our people, because that is what a representative does.
Yeah. What do you think? I mean, I know that it was a pretty big deal when President Trump endorsed you. I mean, what was that experience like for you?
Oh, it was a huge honor. I mean, I can't imagine, any person that is running for office, to get the endorsement of your president.
Yeah.
And it was. I mean, it was a great conversation. He talked about how important Doug was.
Yeah.
As a representative, and the great man that he was, and that he wanted to support me, and so I'm proud to have that endorsement. And again, I just think it's about going out there and getting things done for the American people. I know that's something that's very important to the president, and the promises that he made during his campaign, he is fulfilling. And that's the same thing with me. Like, I want to go out there and tell people, here's what I can do, here's what I want to do. And not only am I going to make those promises, I'm going to follow through on them.
Yeah. There is a lot going on right now in Congress. And I mean, just from funding Department of Homeland Security, I think there was actually some big movement just in the last hour or so in terms of President Trump signing a bill to fund DHS finally, right?
Right.
But we know that there has just been fights over money, how to pay for everything, conversations about, does the president have too much power, or is he taking more power than he should when it comes to going to war with Iran? Where do you stand on some of these issues?
Well, one, I mean, we should never let the government shut down. We need to work together to make sure that government is functioning. But of course, there's also, we want to make sure that government is functioning in the right way. And we do need to eliminate fraud and abuse. And so that's been a big focus, right? With DOGE and other programs here in California, we've seen, and this is just the tip of the iceberg, a doctor in Southern California that fraudulently billed Medi-Cal $270 million. That's money that we need for our rural health care, right? For our clinics, for our hospitals. We do need to get on top of that issue. And then when it comes to the war, people can criticize the president, but be consistent, because President Obama went into Libya, without congressional authorization. He went after, terrorists, in the Middle East, even Osama bin Laden, right, and took him out. Look, I think the precedent has been that sometimes it is very much needed for executive power to take quick action when we have information about what's going on. And I think in this case, the president made the right decision, making that strike in Iran. I've said it was actually the greatest blow to toxic masculinity in 1,000 years when he took out the Ayatollah and all of his mullahs, right? And let's not forget, I mean, this is a regime that just months ago murdered over 30,000 of its own citizens, many of them women, who came out and protested, dared to show their hair in public. It's a very wicked regime. Now, do we need to get out of there? I don't want to get into a forever war, and the president has said he doesn't want to get us into a prolonged conflict, and I believe him when he says that. And I think we've accomplished several objectives, getting rid of the the nuclear enablement there, the missiles. Now we need to secure the Strait of Hormuz. Obviously, that's a big issue right now. But we've taken care of some of those objectives already, and I think we need to continue the work. But I do think we need to get out of that conflict as soon as possible.
Yeah. I feel like recently we've seen members of Congress really in the spotlight for ethical accusations against them, relationships that may have been not above board. Do you feel like things are changing in terms of people are just having better expectations of their representatives, or there's just more information on social media? I mean, I would say I'd like to think that all of our representatives have good intentions. What do you think's going on there?
Yeah, I mean, things are finally getting brought to light, and I think that is a great thing. Things that were swept under the rug, that were done in the dark, have been brought to light.
Yeah.
And Exhibit A of that was Representative Swalwell and everything that happened in the aftermath of that. And I think, yeah, people are rightfully calling for, like, we want a clean house.
Yeah.
Let's start by cleaning up the House of Representatives,
Yeah.
right? Making sure that people are abiding to the highest standards, right? And that we never tolerate the kind of abuse that was seen there, right? And, you know who was a great example of how you should be? Doug Lamalfa, a man of integrity, who did everything to uphold high standards, high values, represent his district, and then get back home, to make sure that he was paying attention to business. And I hope that this may be the new beginning in the House of Representatives of that kind of style of leadership.
Yeah. What keeps your, moral compass on track? I mean, did you ever have times where you were worried during a campaign, like, God, what if something were to come up? I know I have times in my past that were a little bit rough, but I'm not a politician, so.
My faith is what really grounds me, and, my wife and I, we grew up together, and our Christian faith has always been like the center of how we operate. And, so I just, when I come back home after, being in Sacramento, it's a lot of times my wife will say, hey, no, that doesn't sound good. This is, that's Sacramento stuff. You need to focus on, hey, what's the most important thing, and that's your district. And so I have that, certainly to help ground me. And yeah, I feel like I've always just tried to be, who I am.
Yeah.
And fight for my people, and let the rest take care of itself.
Right. So I heard you saying that earlier, that it was faith, freedom, and family.
Right.
Obviously important issues for you. One thing I always am curious about when it comes to faith, something that's so wonderful about our country, right, is that people have freedom to practice whatever religion resonates with them, as long as it doesn't infringe on the rights of somebody else. We do have, it feels like in recent years, there's been a lot more conversation about God in politics and coming from our leaders. I would say, I guess, maybe what's your take on that? And do you feel like for constituents out there who maybe they don't have, God isn't a piece of their life, right? Or they're of a different religion than yours. Does that stand in the way of you representing them?
No, not at all. And I mean, what I would say is, I think it's so awesome that we're seeing that kind of a revival in a way. And I use as a great example, Charlie Kirk. I mean, I think he, more than probably anyone in my generation, really started to bring back that, hey, our faith, needs to be lived out. And it needs to be lived out in politics. And those values should guide our decisions, right? And we should be thinking about, hey, how is our actions glorifying, to God? And, I represent people that have all kinds of different beliefs, right? But I also don't hide what I believe.
Sure.
Right? And I think that, people see that, I ultimately think that people see that those values are what guide me, and that those are values that I think ultimately lead to better policies and better representation, for people. And I think we should be asking those types of questions, like, hey, what is it that is really important, right? So much of the noise around us right now is over things that are kind of secondary, and we need to put the focus on people and what is good for our communities, and how do we steward that, and how do we bring people together, right? And I think that's a lot of what my faith does, is it brings people together and to focus on what's righteous and what's good.
Okay, let's talk a little bit more about the fraud and, waste is one thing, right? Fraud is taking it to a completely different level. I know that we're seeing a lot going on in Minnesota, for example, even just this week with, I think, 22 different businesses and entities being raided by the FBI. In your time in the Assembly, though, looking at what's happened in our state, aside from that one particular case you already mentioned, was there any other blatant issues of fraud in recent years that that have come to light, in your opinion?
I mean, where do we start, right? I mean, we had the unemployment insurance, EDD during COVID. The checkbook was open, and we sent out checks to people who were on death row, to prisoners, to fraudsters. In fact, over $30 billion documented of fraud that went out in EDD, because they weren't properly watching the shop, right? Hospice care, all these fake hospice cares that we found were opened up in Southern California, right? These people are billing, our our taxpayer dollar programs fraudulently.
Yeah.
And again, those are dollars. This is why everybody should care about this. You know, my opponents will probably try to bring up, oh, Medi-Cal's been cut in the federal HR 1. Okay, fine, but how about the dollars that are being spent right now? Are they actually getting down to people who need it? That should be the number one priority, is making sure those dollars get there. Imagine what I could do with the billions of dollars that have been fraudulently wasted, and instead put that into our rural hospitals, and instead put that into our rural healthcare clinics. Wouldn't that be a huge addition? I think absolutely it would, right? And sure, we need to fight for our rural healthcare. You know who did that? Doug Lamalfa. In HR 1, $50 billion was set aside for rural healthcare. We need to make sure we get our fair share of that money.
Yeah.
Because that was nationwide. But we need an advocate who's going to go in there and push for those things. And so these are all things I really want to work on. I think we can make up for a lot if we stop the waste, fraud, and abuse, and then we focus our efforts on where the money is needed most.
Yeah, okay. Well, it's with the new maps, the congressional redistricting, we have a different group of voters to a certain extent. And when I spoke with your opponents, Audrey Denny and Mike McGuire, I was kind of asking them, being Democrats, why should more conservative-leaning rural Northern Californians believe that you're going to stand up for what is important to them? And I guess I'll ask you the opposite. You have traditionally, being for Assembly District 3, right, you've had kind of a more rural Northern California voter base. Now you have to appeal to a whole different kind of Bay Area set of voters, and those would be your constituents as well. How are you going to make sure their needs are met?
Right. Well, Prop 50 was a complete injustice, and one of my opponents, Mike McGuire, was behind the whole thing. And allegedly, a lot of reports were that he had this district drawn to favor himself. His problem is we live in America, and at the end of the day, the people decide. Politicians don't get to pick their voters. In fact, quite the opposite. And so that has really been my mantra. Look, I've always had Republicans and Democrats and independents who vote for me, in this district. And I love that, because I think they see that, look, I stand up for them, I look out for them, and I try to make sure we're represented. And I don't think that's any different in Sonoma County and Lake County and Mendocino. In fact, in the conversations I've had as I've gotten over there, they feel like they haven't really been represented. They've never really had a choice. Yeah. Well, I'm going to give them a choice. And I think that's the beauty of America and our system of government, is that people get to have a choice, right? They get to vote, and they get to decide who they want to be their representative, which is, again, why Prop 50 was so wrong. We shouldn't do partisan gerrymandering. I think it was wrong in Texas. It was wrong to do here in California. I would support a bill that would require independent redistricting in every state, because at the end of the day, it's important that communities get to choose the representative of their choice.
Yeah.
That's what representation should be. That's how our district should be drawn. Not to favor, some politician, right? Not to favor some party. And again, they're the ones that say this, no kings, right? There shouldn't be any kings. Mike's not going to get coronated. He's going to have to work and earn the support of voters in this district, and throughout all of the North State. And I think he's going to have our time.
Do you think, I feel like some people would say that the whole redistricting craziness that has spread across our nation started with a push from the White House. Do you dispute that?
No, I don't think that's true. I mean, I think if you looked at Texas, there was other things going on there where they actually had to redraw districts, but it's gotten really crazy now, right? I mean, when you look at Virginia now, who just passed a redistricting plan, it's about 50-50 there between Republicans and Democrats in terms of how people vote. But they just passed a new redistricting plan where 9 of the seats are Democrats and 1 is Republican. It's so out of balance. That's exactly what happened here in California. I mean, we get Republicans, statewide vote. It's about 40% Republican, 60% Democrat. But the lines that they've drawn have set it up to where Republicans only get 7% of the congressional seats. That's just wrong. And I mean, and there's seats like Connecticut and Massachusetts where Republicans have 0. Even though they represent a pretty significant amount of the electorate. Like, if anybody has done this redistricting thing on steroids, it's been the Democratic Party. And I think they do need to be called out for that. And it's not right, and we should stop it entirely, because it doesn't, whether Republicans do it or Democrats do it, it's wrong. And at the end of the day, we need to make sure that every place has a representative, right? That should be the focus. Our places and communities of interest represented, not parties, not politicians.
Let me ask you about the Farm Bill. If there's a lot in it, right? And I know there was supposed to be a vote today, and that was pushed down the road. From what you've seen, do you feel like there are going to be benefits to rural Northern California in what's been drafted so far?
Yeah, and let's start with, there already have been. In H.R. 1, the big beautiful bill, there was the bridge program. That is getting money to farmers right now. There's farmers in the Sacramento Valley who are getting that vital dollars they need in tough times, through that program. There was actually a really great program in there for the rice industry, which is very, critical to our area. Moving forward, we've actually already started to get some results for peach growers who many of them lost their contracts because Del Monte went bankrupt. Even before, I've already started working with Mike Thompson, Democrat in Congress. We got $9 million to help, those farmers who are going through really tough times. Now we move to the Farm Bill, where I think there's a lot of good things moving on that front. Additional support for our farmers to get them through this time. But the biggest thing is like getting trade deals that are good for American and California farmers. Our wine grape growers right now are facing foreign imports that are coming in. These companies are taking cheap imports from Argentina, for example, and then they're selling that wine as American wine. That's ridiculous. Like, we need to stand up for American farmers and growers. So I want to continue that. And I think in this Farm Bill, we also have an opportunity to really support specialty crops. So almonds, walnuts, peaches, prunes, those traditionally have been crops that haven't really gotten, support that they need. And so I think we need to put a focus on that. Wine grapes. These are all the different crops that we need to help support through this tough time, all with a view towards getting them better trade deals, which will mean they won't need, government support.
Yeah.
They'll be getting good prices, and we need to lower their costs.
Yeah.
Just like everybody, we need to lower the cost of living to help our farmers and growers in California.
Okay. Have you been following the wolf issue here
Absolutely.
in California? We just read some new numbers today that these packs, they just keep getting bigger and bigger. They're spreading further south. It's a state issue and it's a federal issue, right? Do you have something in mind that can be done to kind of support ranchers and meet in the middle maybe?
Yes, we need to. One, we have gotten some support to help farmers. Through this,
Yeah.
There was a state program that was enacted. I worked with Heather Hadwick, who's our Assemblywoman, my colleague in the North State, and Megan Daly, our senator, to get that. But what we really need is we do need to be able to take aggressive action up to lethal force against wolves. They are not endangered. Even the federal Fish and Wildlife Service has said that gray
But
wolves
they're
are
still
no
on the
longer
list,
endangered.
right?
They're still on the list, but the experts are saying they are not endangered. And what we have is we have wolves who have learned to kill.
Yeah.
And those wolves are incredibly hard to stop. The only way you ultimately can stop them is through aggressive measures up to lethal force. Now, I'm the only candidate in this race who's going to say we need to do that,
Yeah.
right? The others are going to give lip service, but they're not really going to stop, what's been terrorizing our cattle ranchers in the North State. And so right now we have really good help on the federal side. We've been working with the federal Fish and Wildlife Service, and they've been actually very helpful. If you talk to a lot of the ranchers, they will say that same thing. But we need to get the California State Fish and Wildlife Service to get on the same page.
Why do you think they're not on the same page? Like, what would be the motivation to say, hey, we need to just let these wolves kind of do whatever they want, or just scare them with music?
I think it's been the previous leadership, which, hey, Gavin Newsom is going out, and that's a great thing for California, and it's certainly a great thing for us. And there's now new leadership there. And so already I think there's been some good conversations there. And anytime you want to do something on an issue, you have to bring stakeholders together. And that's what we're doing. There's been a lot of great meetings with ranchers in the North State where we brought in these different agencies. And I give a lot of credit to Assemblywoman Hadwick and Senator Daly who've helped convene a lot of that and have had a lot of great discussions. So we want to continue that. And as I come in, if I'm our federal representative, I think I can really push. And so I think bringing all these folks together, we can get there. Sierra Valley was a great example. In Sierra Valley, we were able to actually take out 2 of these wolves. That's what we had to do after we documented what was
it,
going on
training
there.
their puppies to kill or something.
Exactly.
Yeah.
You know, that you could see that these were wolves that were never going to change, and it gave them the authorization to do what they did there. And actually, that's made the situation a lot better, right? We need to be able to do that in Shasta Valley and these other places in the North State as well. And so, again, working with all the stakeholders, I think we can get there. And I will continue to be a strong voice for our ranchers.
Okay. I mean, just kind of as a recap, there are, again, 2 Democrats running against you for the same office, both for the partial term and then the upcoming 2-year term. What makes you just better qualified to represent the needs of, you know, the regular person who lives here?
I'd say one, like I've been doing the work. You know, I've been doing the work in the North State. I think people know me. I think they trust me to be their voice. And again, I think it's Republicans, Democrats, and independents who come up to me all the time and they say, hey, we really appreciate what you've been doing. And I want to continue that. And I really feel like we've had this really big sense of loss losing Doug Lamalfa. And now more than ever, like we need to unite. You know, we need to unite together and demand that kind of representation. And so I think that's what I offer. I think I have a really good record, you know, serving in the Assembly. And it's been a bipartisan record of getting things done on wildfire fuels reduction, on water, on protecting our vital water rights, but also investing in new water storage, on protecting rural health care.
Yeah.
You know, I helped keep Calusa Medical Center and Glenn Medical Center open the first time, and I plan to do it again with Glenn Medical Center. We've already gotten that, you know, the first step there with Doug Lamalfa working with Adam Schiff, you know, a Democrat,
Right.
to get the critical access designation back
Yeah.
for Glenn Medical Center. I think I can step right in and continue that work and make sure that we get that hospital back open.
Well, since you keep bringing up Doug, I've got to ask you, are you ready to commit to all the crab feeds and the pancake breakfasts and driving your car in the parades and, hey, texting your local media in the middle of a House floor vote so to make sure that your constituents back home get that for their 11 o'clock newscast?
Well, you know, man, there will never be another Doug Lamalfa. I don't know how he did all the things that he did. 3 parades in one day, and I think they like started at the same time. I mean, it's different stuff that he did, but certainly, man, I want to bring that same kind of effort to it. Big boots to fill, but I'm ready to get out there, and we've traversed, you know, the entire district and gotten to every part, and we're going to continue to, you know, fight hard to get results for our people.
You know, I think it was right. The last time I interviewed Doug was about that story that I think I spoke with you about as well, the whole Oroville Dam relicensing and how things were stuck up with FERC and trying to figure out, are there some environmental issues that maybe... Anyways, I'm not sure where things stand with that now, but we have seen Butte County come forward with this new push, like, hey, you guys, don't forget what was promised to us and never given. Being now, if you were to move forward into Congress from the federal perspective versus state, does that give you is there any sort of leverage you have to make something happen?
Well, hey, look, I mean, again, with the Trump administration, you know, being in charge, I think we got an opportunity to make sure that Butte County's voice is heard. And again, I see that as my role is, you know, okay, there's going to be decisions made, but don't forget us. And I applaud the Butte County Board of Supervisors for coming out with that website and saying, hey, look, there's a lot of things that did not happen, right? Promises made. And, you know, when you build this huge storage facility, which has been a great boon to all of California, right? You know, you need to take care of the communities that host it.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, I certainly want to continue to be that advocate, you know, as that process is moving forward. And making sure that those promises are kept.
Okay. All right, Assemblymember Gallagher, thank you so much for being here.
Yeah.
Appreciate your time.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks for listening today. I decided to offer this podcast after enough of you let me know that you wanted a deeper dive into certain stories than you get on our TV broadcasts. We elect certain people to represent our voice, but who are they really? My hope is that this podcast answers that question. I love your feedback, and I want to know who you'd like to hear from next. Just fill out that comment section and leave us a review on Apple Podcasts, YouTube, or Spotify.